everybody, and welcome back to Session 7 of IBS Relief Now. Today's topic is a tough one. Today's topic is about the role that past trauma plays in both activating IBS, maintaining IBS symptoms, and generally having a health compromising effect on many aspects of a person's physical, emotional, and social functioning. Well, why are we talking about IBS and trauma? The hard truth is that IBS tends to show up much more frequently in women than it does in men, even though both men and women, when you ask them about the symptoms that they have, they describe symptoms consistent with IBS. But in terms of who tends to seek treatment, women seek treatment much more often for IBS-related symptoms than do men. What that means is that we understand a lot more about the lives and the histories of women because they come in and talk to their different doctors about what's going on in their lives, not just about the symptoms in their digestive system. And as a result of that, the research is pretty clear. It's a sobering fact that up to 40% of women with IBS symptoms have at some point over the course of their lives experienced significant emotional, verbal, or sexual trauma, sometimes going back all the way into young childhood. So that's the hard reality, that unfortunately IBS is often associated with a history of different types of emotional trauma. That doesn't mean that trauma causes IBS, and it doesn't mean that IBS is therefore just a psychological problem. As we've been saying throughout this course, mind and body, brain, mind, and body really work together as one, and when you have that kind of traumatic history, it can dysregulate from the brain, it can dysregulate various functions in the body, including the digestive tract, so it does have an impact on bringing about the dysregulation of our physical being that puts us at risk for different forms of dysregulation to develop, including the particular form that we call IBS. Another important aspect to recognize is that throughout our lives, we are connected to our personal histories. Now, having said that, it's really important to keep in mind that just because we're connected to our history does not mean that we have to be defined by our history. In other words, when I work with people, including people who don't have IBS, who come to me and talk about difficulties from their past, one of the things that I hear over and over again is the belief that their past is the best predictor of their future functioning. And the reality is that's simply not true. So while we are connected to our past, in other words, what's happened has sometimes set up patterns of functioning and patterns of responding, such as what we see in IBS, that tend to maintain themselves, the point is that programs like this allow you to rewire and reorganize those physical functioning patterns so that the link between the past determining how we function in the present day can finally be broken, and we can start to establish new and healthier and happier patterns of functioning going forward. It is worthwhile to think about shifting from the idea that I am a product of my past to beginning to think that my past can inform my future. That's really what we're focusing on today. How can you learn to take a history that has included some really unfortunate, abusive, and traumatic experiences and have those experiences become, in effect, vital resources that we can draw on to help us and our bodies and our brains be able to learn how to face our future with more optimism, with more courage, and with more physical vitality and general health. It's perfectly reasonable to ask, do I have to? I find that question comes up a lot when I work with people who present with a history of trauma. Their question is, do I really have to face it? Can't I just put it behind me and move on? Can't I just keep it locked away in the past? And unfortunately, the answer is mostly no. The way we carry the past inside of us continues to have an impact on how the effects of those original experiences show up in our lives days, months, years, and even decades later. So the truth is, learning how to deal with and change the way that we carry the past, even and especially when it is a painful past, is a key to being able to free us, to liberate us from those effects of past trauma, including effects that show up in different features of IBS. In fact, the research through a set of studies called the ACE, ACE studies, which stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences, those studies show that unless people make a concerted effort to change the way they carry the past, they are at a much higher risk not only for problems involving the digestive tract like IBS, but it can show up in the form of obesity, diabetes, heart disease, and a whole host of other difficulties that are finally put to rest when we learn to deal with the past differently and in a more healing way. So how do we do that? An optimistic bit of information is that our whole nervous system is built around a process called neuroplasticity. In other words, it has the capacity to rewire how it fires, when it fires, and what it fires for. That capacity to change is very tied in with the whole body's ability and even the body's desire to learn. So you might say that the past continues to persist until we establish a new way for the body to function, a new way for the body to operate. And when we do that, literally our nervous system, including our brain, rewires so that it learns to fire in ways that can reduce not only IBS symptoms, but some of the symptoms of the other conditions that I alluded to before. The nervous system is ready to learn. Our job is to put ourselves in a position to be exposed to and to absorb that new learning so we can free ourselves from our painful past. From the perspective of having experienced trauma earlier in life, this perspective might be useful. When we're facing unpredictability, danger, and threat, the gut reacts by anticipating it needs to stay in a high alert mode to deal with the danger or the threat that was almost certain to follow. In other words, that high alert state becomes the body's and the gut's default mode. What we want to do when we learn to face our pasts is to shift the default mode. If we detect that danger is present, if we detect threat coming up, we can go into that mode with its effect on gut functioning, right? We talk about having a gut sense, or it ties my stomach in knots, or I feel like my stomach is doing somersaults, or I have butterflies in my stomach. There are all sorts of different ways in which we talk about the effect of discomfort, unease, and danger in terms of GI-related language. But when we detect it, it's okay to go into that kind of high alert mode. But we don't stay there as a default. Instead, we can be freed up to stay in a more comfortable, relaxed, and at ease mode, saving the need to gear up in a high alert mode for when or if danger shows up. The effect of shifting our default mode from constant high alert to going into high alert only when we need to is that it allows the body from head to toe to function in a more comfortable and relaxed manner, including the gut, and most of all, including the symptoms that we associate with IBS. In effect, what we're doing is shifting from a negativity dominant mode, a negative mode of anticipation, into a mode where our default is an expectation of positivity. That doesn't mean we're naive. It doesn't mean that we look at the world through rose-colored glasses. We still have the ability and even the obligation to take care of ourselves and defend ourselves and assert ourselves effectively, but we don't have to stay in a constant or chronic high alert mode. When we shift into a mode where the expectation is a positive one, not only does the body feel more relaxed and the gut function in a more at ease fashion, we actually see a reduction in the severity of autoimmune conditions. We see an increase in energy and a decrease in fatigue. We begin to see a dropping down or an easing off in patterns of anxiety and worry or panic. And we begin to see a decrease in the patterns of negativity that can show up in terms of mood disorders or depression. Interestingly, an additional benefit is that it changes the way our body feels the need to store and burn calories. So we can actually see an increased ability to lose weight, and we see a decreased risk for prediabetes or for blood sugar problems in those people who have diabetes. Now, it's important to recognize that IBS relief now is not primarily a trauma recovery or a trauma healing program, though I've had requests to create a program like that in the future. That's not what IBS relief now is all about. So what I want to offer you next are some core principles that apply to IBS but are not unique to IBS, but they are core principles that put us on the road to being able to deal more directly with the negative impact of a traumatic history on our present life and our future life. The first of those principles is that the body thrives in an atmosphere of safety and stability. If you ask yourself, is my lifestyle safe and stable? Is my lifestyle secure? Are the social connections that I have stable, safe, and secure? And the answer is no. That's where you have to begin. If you are not in a safe work or relationship environment, it's very difficult for IBS symptoms to be brought under better control. So ask yourself, do a self-check on that one first. How safe, stable, and secure am I in my current lifestyle? Core principle number 2. Our emotions are both biological and psychological messengers. They are cues that we develop to be able to signal us with awareness about what we have to pay attention to. Many of the people that I see with IBS only pay attention to signals that are associated with elevated symptoms. So when gut pain or a sense of urgency begins to develop, that's when they focus in. The reality is, if you're going to be dealing with past trauma, it's important to be really effective at learning to listen to the biological and psychological messengers that your body generates that we call emotions. How tuned in are you to feelings of excitement, joy, possibility, sadness, worry, danger, and concern? Do you notice those cues so you can take corrective action early rather than waiting until the situation gets out of control and you have an even bigger and more negative impact on you and your health as a result? A third core principle that's helpful for trauma healing as well as for IBS control is to recognize that each of us is a unique individual. Each of us is as unique as our fingerprints. What the implication of that is that we need to be able to acknowledge how important it is to live our unique life. We weren't put on the earth to live someone else's idea of who or what we are supposed to be, who or what we are supposed to do. So learning to ask yourself, what is my unique life, is a really important attitude to cultivate. It's a really important self-reflective practice to get into, because the more we can own our uniqueness, the more able we are to live a life that reflects that uniqueness. And that's good for IBS. It's also really good for trauma, where many of the people that I have worked with have been given horrific messages that really denigrates, that really puts down the sense they have that there's anything unique or special about them. Principle 4 is about self-acceptance. Now, I said with Principle 1 that safety, security, and stability is the first order of business, but that's about how safe we are in the world. Principle 4, which is about self-acceptance, is about what we do to help ourselves feel safe in the world. If we accept our imperfections, our fallibilities, if we can learn to accept the mistakes that we've made in the past, we can adopt an attitude that says, I don't have to be perfect to belong. I don't have to be perfect to deserve good things in my life, and to be able to work toward them with the expectation that at least some of them are going to turn out in a positive way. So practices that cultivate an attitude of self-acceptance are really an important part of a trauma healing process, and they do wonders from an IBS management perspective. The fifth core principle is about authenticity. In order for us to live an authentic, unique life, reflecting the absolute uniqueness of each of us, we have to be willing to live a life that is consistent with our principles, our values, and our commitments. So it's important, first of all, to ask yourself, what are the things that you hold most dear? What do you value the most? What are the commitments you make to follow through with actions that reflect how you bring those values to life? They're not just an academic exercise, they're actually the things that you do day in and day out to make sure that your life is lived authentically. Again, great for trauma healing and critically important for IBS healing. The sixth principle kind of follows from what we've said before. When we practice self-acceptance, when we recognize that we are unfinished, that we are still in the process of becoming our best selves, we can more readily recognize that it's less about where we are at this point and more what are the things that we do each and every day to keep taking steps that move us closer to becoming our best selves. Now, from my perspective, the goal is never to reach that best self. In fact, I don't think any of us really ever do. It's not about arriving. It's about the day in and day out practices that are a great way of exercising resilience. We get back on our feet and keep moving toward that best self, using actions and making choices that reflect our values and the follow-through on our commitments. We are on the road to becoming a better self day by day. As we're about to finish, Session 7, I want to leave you with 4 different types of practices that I invite you to engage in because of their proven benefit, not only in trauma healing, but also their benefit in terms of IBS symptom control. And the first relates to the fact that you and I are both embodied beings. We don't exist as disembodied minds. We are an integrated whole. And the more we are attuned to the workings of the body, the more we can allow the body to inform our brain and our mind about how to live our lives more safely, more comfortably, and more fulfillingly. So examples of practices that link mind, body, and brain together are things like taking a walk in nature. There's a wonderful world of literature and research that shows just how healing it is to be out in nature, how it helps to heal the disconnects that often arise when we have had trauma in our history and when we continue to carry that trauma with us. So walks in nature, yoga courses, certain kind of meditative retreats are examples of mind-body practices that bring us into better and more whole connection, more holistic connection to our bodies so we can be really fully embodied beings. A second type of practice is self-reflection. For some people that's journal writing. For other people that is composing poetry or song lyrics. For other people it is simply time to sit and contemplate or reflect. But the point is that literally for thousands of years, the benefit, the holistic healing benefit of those kind of self-reflection practices has been proven over and over again. So whatever particular one you choose, building some time for self-reflection into your week is an important part of trauma healing, and it's really essential for IBS control. That's why I included the self-reflection journal in the IBS Relief Now program. The third action to take is to go through a thorough evaluation of the quality of your connections to others. How is the quality of your relationship to your primary partner going? What is the connection like to your circle of friends? What is the connection that you carry to coworkers? What's the quality of that connection? Or to members of your extended family? And interestingly, especially from a trauma point of view, it's important to ask, what is the quality of the connection you carry to people from early in life, some of whom may have already passed from this life? What is the way in which you continue to carry those people with you? This is especially true in relation to people who were abusive, who induced the trauma in you. How do you carry them? What is the quality of that connection? That's an important part of trauma work, and I invite you to do an evaluation to gauge how that issue is operating in your day-to-day life. And finally, I think it's really important that you recognize that another time-tested finding is that the more we align our lives with our unique purpose that gives our life unique meaning, the better able we are to heal from trauma, and the better able we are to have our physical bodies begin to function with more and more regularity and more health. One of the people who I think might be really interesting, actually I'll name two who are really interesting to read. Both of them are individuals who went through the genocide, the Holocaust of World War II. One is a man named Elie Wiesel, W-E-I-S-E-L, and the other is Viktor Frankl, F-R-A-N-K-L. Both of them were individuals who, in spite of enduring unimaginable horrors in World War II, survived the war, and went on to live lives that are absolutely defined by the way that they made meaning and purpose and mission a central focus of their lives. They went on to live very long lives, and they are a model for the rest of us that trauma can be overcome, life can become incredibly rewarding, our history of pain can become a resource for future growth and development, and that's a really optimistic note to end on as we come to the end of Session 7. I look forward to working with you soon as we move into Session 8, where we'll tie together everything that we've done so far so that you can walk away from this course with a clearer sense of how to obtain IBS relief now.